Ajuna Kyaruzi. Ajuna works in developer relations at Datadog and cares about using software to help people sustainably run large-scale systems, focusing on incident management and SLOs. She loves community building and volunteers with multiple mentorship programs aimed at helping early career folks break into tech and ensuring that they have successful careers. Previously, she worked at Google as a software engineer on Google Maps and as a site reliability engineer at Google Cloud. Juna, come on up. Take it away.
Thanks. Cool. Hi, folks. Thanks for having me here. Let me see. I always feel a little hidden behind the podium, so I'll move over here and try not to annoy the AV people too much by being here instead of there. But cool. So today I'm going to chat with you a little bit about learning from incidents, and I want to just start off by saying that I have a very love-hate relationship with endings. I don't know about y'all. Generally, when I'm super hooked into something, it's at the end of the thing, and I find that so frustrating because I'm hooked, right? And I know some of that is just storytelling. They want me to be hooked at the end, so I come back for the sequel. But it's always just like, I want to know more, and it ends there. Like, if I think about the first Avengers movie, I'm going to talk about superheroes a lot today, so get ready for that. But in the first Avengers movie, obviously, there's a catastrophic event, aliens come into New York, all our favorite landmarks go down to prove to us that it's a big deal, and then they don't kill the bad guys, they arrest him, and the city's destroyed, but then they go like chill and eat shawarma, and I'm just like, bro, the city's destroyed, what are we doing? When does the cleanup start? There's a whole team here that's really stressed out because they have to rebuild New York. And they're just like, nah, it's totally fine. And I see this on Twitter every few months. Hopefully I'll continue to see it on Twitter every few months. But it says if the Avengers were real, we'd really hate them. Because generally after they save the day, everything is sort of in pieces. Your car that you just paid off was thrown at Thanos and did absolutely nothing. And all of a sudden you have to start over, right? And they think about this idea a lot, especially in like the later movies, about what happens with the destruction and what happens after superheroes, because they don't really deal about them. Another one of my favorite superhero movies, The Incredibles, if you haven't watched it, please check it out, really deals with this idea of like, what happens when we don't appreciate all of the work that these superpowered humans do to save us, but at the end of the day, they don't really leave things as well as we would like them. So thinking about those things really led me to thinking about incidents and how I love incidents at the end, right? The during part is really stressful. You really want to know what's going on, and when you're really excited to know what happens, they end. And I'm like, oh man. And then all the sort of hard work begins because we have to rebuild after the incidents are over. We go through the incident life cycle, so obviously we know an incident happened, we declare it, we fix it. I'm really fluffing through that middle part there, but then we resolve things to a state where people can use it, and then we productionize that a little bit and mark it as resolved. And then we have the follow-up process, right? And that's the part all of us are like, ooh, we need to do it, but do we want to? Like, we do, but also like, we're already pretty tired after dealing with the incidents. We're the Avengers in this case, where we're just like, cool, I'm gonna go relax. And everyone's like, no, the city is destroyed. Can you please come back and deal with something here? And incident follow-up has a lot of different things, right? You capture all the immediate action items, you write them down because you need to get them down ASAP, and then you investigate what was going on, right? And then you have some more remediation work to do there. And we know why, right? There's parts of it we need to do continuous learning. Sadly, but also excitingly, incidents are a cause for us to invest into the reliability of our systems, right? Something went wrong, and now we need to stop what we were doing and deal with what happened and learn from it. It brings a lot of insight into how the system worked when we didn't know, right? All of a sudden, we didn't know those two things were connected, and that's why it broke in that cool way. We didn't know that when we went down, this team that we didn't think was related to us, but is also went down, so now we're responsible for them. And all of those really lead us to becoming better engineers as well, because we now know our systems a little bit better. We have to coordinate a bit better because other teams depend on us and we depend on them, and we have to coordinate to figure out how to fix all of our processes together. And we have a lot of obligation to our customers, right? Our users, you might have service level agreements in place. Obviously, they might be losing money, you might be losing money with your systems being down, and you have to really dig deep and figure out what happened so that you can better handle it if similar things happen in the future. Not the exact same thing, because hopefully you learn, but when similar things happen, we want to know that we learned from that. And then we have to also, like I said, invest in the reliability so that when we don't have similar things happen again. So there are a few best practices that you might have heard about when it comes to incident retrospectives, right? There's a lot that we discuss, and if you haven't, I'm gonna go over them real quickly. If some of these are a bit newer to you. One of the big ones is blamelessness, right? There's a whole company named after this because it's a core part of what we describe as our incident retrospectives. We want to make sure that we go into it assuming good intent. If there's a bad actor in your system, you should just get rid of them. But otherwise, everyone else who's working in your system did not intend for your system to go down, right? So we're supposed to go into it being like, your system went down and we went down, but it's not your fault. But like, how do we make sure that we do that better next time? And that, it's great, but it's also really easy to say in practice. In actuality, when emotions are high and you really did not need this right now, it's a lot harder to sort of do this. And that's sort of true with all the other ones, right? Like ownership as well. When you do have an issue with your system and it affects someone else, it's up to you to fix it, but other teams depending on you. So there might be some work that they need to do, so you need to balance that relationship out, right? What should I do to get this done, and what should you do to get this done? And also, just like when you have an incident commander for your incidents to help get it through completion, also for the retrospective, some sort of ownership to make sure that we complete that process also matters, right? Maybe picking one person to be in charge of that so that they're like, okay, guys, we have to go to our retrospective meeting and kind of deal with this and get all the stakeholders together is something that we really care about. Another part is collaboration, cooperation. I covered it a lot in the past too, but you're working with other people, your users, people in your comms team, because they need to tell the users what happened, internal stakeholders. So there's a lot of good opportunity to collaborate with folks and also rely on each other's strengths so you're not solving the same problem again and again, right? We're all dealing with this joint thing and we need to come together and see, like, I'll deal with that part, you deal with this part, and sort of practice that. And a big part of it is also timeliness, right? We have to do this pretty quickly. Those graphs that told you that things were bad don't really roll back, so you gotta take a screenshot early or whatever the case may be, because we don't wanna forget all of the things that were super important during our incidents. If you have your channel where you communicate, whether that's Slack or IRC or whatever the case is, that retention period might be really short, so you need to go back and take a screenshot of all the important things that happened so you can know what actually went down. At Datadog, we try to do this within 5 days. I've heard of it being even faster, where you try to get all the incident information down within 3 days, but it really depends. But generally, it's like ASAP is basically the name of the game here. So I want to just check in. How many people are on call in the room, generally? Not right now, like in general. Okay, like maybe half. So how do y'all who are on call feel about postmortems? Do y'all like it? If you like it, like hand. A lot fewer, I'm gonna be honest with y'all. And I know where that comes from. You probably were very excited about them in the beginning, and then something happened, and now you're like, ooh, it didn't go well that one time, so now I'm very skeptical every time I have to do it, right? And that happened to me as well. So I'll chat with you a little bit about my first incident when I was a baby SRE. I was bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and all of that jazz. And I just joined a team working on virtualization internally. So my team provided virtual machines to other engineers to use as their personal machine or as their servers, and it was a really cool project. While on that team, within the first year, we decided that we wanted to reinstall all the operating systems that we had. So if you haven't seen how virtualization works or the kind of the system diagram, you have your hardware, right? Or it can be physical or cloud. We had both, mostly physical at the time, and that has an operating system. But there's also operating systems on each of the virtual machines that you're describing, right? They're not containers, so they each have their own little operating system. And it can be very annoying if we have to reinstall all of those. The physical hardware ones are a little easier. We have the hypervisor, we had redundancy, so we could just move all the virtual machines from one cluster, move them away, reinstall that hardware, and then move them back, and that was easy. But then we had to communicate to all the people who used us as our customers that they had to reinstall their operating systems. And that was very hard. And that was partially my task. I had to reach out to all of them and be like, hey, you need to reinstall your operating system by the end of the quarter, then in 60 days, then in 30 days. And around 30 days, I started powering down their servers. But a lot of them just switch them back on because they're like, oh, that was a blip, random, and then they'll just bring them back. Because I don't know if you know, but people do not read their emails. I don't know if you read your emails, you might be in very few, but a lot of people just don't read them. And that was very annoying for me. But some of that was also something else. One of the other projects we had concurrently was that we didn't have updated information about who owned which server. And that was very annoying because people created the server, their team relied on it, had all the important information on there, but it never went down, so they never knew how to bring it back up. And the person who did that left, either to another team or to out of the company. So then if we emailed that person, they just did not see it, of course. So the team who runs that server did not know we needed them to reinstall. So after the 30 days, I was like, I did all my due diligence, got approvals. I was like, I'm killing all these servers, right? Just deleted rm-rf, gone, right? And I was just, yes, my project is complete. I have gotten rid of all of these problems. I also found out after the fact that we were dealing with a vulnerability because of Spectre. So we really needed to reinstall all of these servers. So that's why my team kept encouraging me to actively delete the ones that were not reinstalled. But then an incident was called. And they were like, hey, we have a server from y'all and it's not up. And I'm like, yeah, I deleted it. And they're like, why on earth would you do that? And I was like, I sent you emails. They're like, we never got your emails. And I was like, I don't know what to do here. And they're like, well, bring it back. And I was like, I have no idea. I can give you the specs. Here is a brand new server with all the specs that you had, but I don't know what was on it because I couldn't back that up. Like it's customizable. You did all your configuration yourself, all of that. So you guys should have that somewhere. And they're like, we do not. And I was like, I don't know how to help you here exactly. So then we went into the post-mortem basically immediately because it was like, there was no action items other than they need to rebuild their server. There was no relevant data other than the time I deleted their server. And the investigation was, hey, Ajuna deleted our server. And I was like, I'm so sorry. But at the same time, it was like immediately blameful, right? Like all these best practices that we talked about, their postmortem had in big words, Ajuna deleted our server and that's why we're down. And I was just like, come on, y'all, like we wrote the book. Like what are we talking about? We should know these best practices. But in the actual moment, like they were in pain because they had to do some work from scratch that they did not have. They hadn't dealt with all the other SRE or DevOps best practices to try disaster recovery and know how their things work so that they can bring them back. And so their reason that happened was me. And eventually I could point them to being like, we needed to do this because of Spectre and other vulnerabilities that we had, so we really needed your server to be reinstalled, but at the point they were in pain. And I didn't understand because I was still a baby SRE, like I said. And so then the ownership part came up because it was like, okay, you owned our server, so you should rebuild it. And I was like, I have no idea what to do here. It's your server. So we kind of kept pushing it back and forth about who should really deal with this. And I was like, I don't know how to help you here because I've done my due diligence by giving you a new server, but it's empty, so you're mad at me. And Thankfully, the collaboration cooperation part did come out. My teammates came up to me and they advised them to change their postmortem to go from Ajuna to virtualization team, deleted our server, just so that because as a team, they gave me the project and gave me the approvals to do the thing, right? I did my due diligence. And so we had that conversation of like, okay, they should have known how to bring back their server. We should have had updated information of who controlled that system, and we should have been able to communicate with them earlier in the fact. But this was like, happened maybe 1 or 2 times out of like several tens of thousands, so it was definitely, in the end game, success, but also with a lot of pain in the way. So that brings us to kind of thinking about like, how do we learn? How do all these things we know to be true come into culture, right? Like we know all the things that we need to be doing, but in the actual day-to-day of the thing, it's really hard to actually do it. And how do we learn as we go about it? And so I spent some time thinking about this, and I heard about this learning pyramid, and I'm putting it in these little quotes because some people really hate this concept. So I'm just going to talk about it broadly, and maybe you can take out what you can from it. But it talks about that there are a lot of different ways of learning. So first of all, we learn by reading. So we read design documents, architecture diagrams, all of that, and then we write, right? Like we write a new design document, adding to that architecture, and then we do. So we write the code, we make the changes, and then we teach. We start mentoring, we become more known on the team, and through all of those is when we really learn really well. You kind of deepen your level of learning by continuing to write, then practice, then actually teach other people what you do. So when I showed this incident life cycle diagram, I actually wrote it pretty wrong. If we think about learning, it looks a little bit more like this, like it's definitely a circle. From each incident, we learn, and then we write new code, and we do other incidents and learn about them, and then we teach other new people on the team, and so it sort of goes in a circle where we're constantly learning. And going back to the Google SRE books, here's a diagram about accelerating people on call, and it sort of covers all of the different parts that I described, right? So when they're newer, they're thinking about incidents and reading and writing about them, right? They're reading postmortems, they're reading documentation, they're doing role play for disasters, and then comes more doing of the role play, starting to reverse engineer things, being included in incident where you're breaking things and fixing things, and then you're shadowing or reverse shadowing and shadowing, so you're starting to do that teaching component, and that's how you get better at the thing, right? Reading, writing, doing, then teaching, right? So it kind of covers and brings a little bit more onus into this like diagram idea. So briefly, I'm going to cover learning from incident retrospectives from my past as well. As it was described, I'm no longer an SRE. I did software engineering for a little bit, and then now I work as a developer advocate. So I don't get a chance to actively be involved in incidents as much, but I'm really still very excited by them. I really want to know what's going on. But I've gone from sort of doing back to reading. And it's actually helped me a lot to learn about things that weren't in my purview beginning. So I kept hearing this. It's been 0 days since it was DNS, all incidents, it's almost always DNS. And I was just like, that's a funny saying, but like, why? And I was like, I knew what DNS was, but networking isn't one of my strong points. I was a coder, more so the software part of it, so I really wasn't very close to the networking side. And I kept on being confused how everything in everyone's mind led back to DNS. And that's because networking is hard, but I don't know if you know, remember, but last year, Meta went down, including WhatsApp. And WhatsApp is what hit me the most. I'm on the social medias, but a lot of the world uses WhatsApp. I don't know how many people in this room do, but like WhatsApp keeps basically the southern hemisphere running, right? I'm from Tanzania. My parents are in Tanzania. And so they message me constantly on WhatsApp. I enjoy it. I'm not complaining in any way. And I just didn't hear from them for like 6 hours, and I was just like, what happened? And it was because WhatsApp was down, along with a lot of other parts of Facebook's infrastructure. And so I went and read their postmortem. So essentially, what happened to them is they have obviously data centers, and us as users, our information goes through their different routers and their backbone to their data centers to get information and kind of bring it back, right? And so part of what happened is their backbone went down when they're doing some routine changes to check the availability of it. And they did have some audit software that should have stopped it, and it just didn't. So their entire backbone went down. And part of that, when that went down, their border gateway protocol couldn't access their DNS server. So they're like, it was probably unhealthy. So DNS went down too. And so no one could access anything, both internally and externally. So all their machines were up, but nothing could communicate with each other, which was fascinating to me. And they'd actually done some work to investigate like their backbone management and done all of this research into risk metrics and did all this auditing and had dashboards and had done all this work, and just like 3 months prior published this document talking about all the cool work that they'd done with their networking and their backbone. But literally when their backbone went down, they could not access anything, including their literal data centers, right? So they were locked out. And I found that funny. I felt for them, but it was also incredibly funny that they could not go into their own data centers, and all their regular equipment did not work to do everything virtually, and all of their usual dashboards, everything was down with their backbone going down. So kind of coming back to this, they had to literally break in to their data centers, bring back up their router so their backbone could go down, and then it was like, oh, okay, we have DNS. And then everything could communicate with each other, including their internal comms, this badge readers, all of that. So from that, I was able to really understand how important routing is and how DNS works and how it really broke things, right? And to sort of recap, it really helped me understand things better just by reading that postmortem, which also affected me a little bit, right? Like, it's hard to read everything, but it was like, this is an area of focus and an area of interest and something I care about. And together, I learned something. And to sort of recap here, we know incidents are complex because processes are hard, technology is hard, dealing with people is hard, and all of that together can be hard overall. The best practices that we know about really need to be practiced so we can actually use them correctly when the going gets tough, right? So as the tough get going, sorry. And learning how to learn can be super helpful so that we can continue to sort of practice. And even if you're not currently writing code anymore in your particular role, maybe reading your postmortems might still be helpful to you. So as I wrap things up in a bow, we're back to another ending. And I told you I have a little love-hate relationship with them, but I hope that this was helpful to you. So my name is Ajuna Kyaruzi. I work at Datadog as an SRE and developer advocate, and really happy to chat with you about any of these things here or later. Yes, thank you so much.
We have some time for questions. All right, what questions do we have for Ajuna? All right.
Yeah, so that, if anyone didn't hear the question, it was how do you continue to keep those learning from incidents alive as people sort of move around, especially a few years later. So part of that is the practicing that I described, right? So a lot of really, we talk about disaster role-playing a lot in SRE and DevOps, where we try to practice what happened, how we would handle an actual incident. I think one of the best ways to do disaster role-playing is with former incidents, where we use the postmortem as sort of the basis of what to do for the disaster role-play, and for especially towards people who weren't on the team when that incident happened, so that they can practice it. In best case scenario, part of your retrospective is writing your run books better. I know that's a little bit hard to do, but that's another component of your systems aren't the same 3 years later. However, some of that knowledge in the run books can be super helpful. So constantly being like, this didn't work, and canceling things out, and having your run books be living documentation about how to handle your instance is another way that I've heard. So between practice and writing, I'm not sure what else you can really do. That's where I have heard, but I'm not sure what else you could do in your particular situation. But happy to chat more about that if it's like, a lot of it is culture as well. It's kind of hard to keep practicing that. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess with dealing with incidents it gets traumatic after a while, considering
Yes.
if that's your day-to-day thing. So like I feel like some points you made are good in terms of it becoming a healthier part of the work culture. How do you find like longevity in this kind of role? And, like,
Longevity in
it is-
SRE?
and yeah, and also like, is this something that is one of those roles where you do it for a while and then you don't because like you're just done and you come back? I don't know.
Sure. So I think you're correct that SRE is definitely a role where there is some trauma, and I think that other roles where people are on call, like other fields that we have, like firefighting, for example, do a much better job at managing that and working towards that. I don't think that as a field we've done a very good job of making sure that everyone who does have a really stressful on-call kind of get a chance to like take a break and have other people kind of do it, so that the feeling is shared throughout the team, so you have that group feeling of like we have to continue on together and that I have support from the other people on my team. So that's one area where I think that as a field we could do better just in the managing of that stress, and that goes through with being on call. Aside from that, it's another culture problem. It's something your team has to do by doing good practices for on-call, right? Like having enough people on your on-call cycle. Twitter currently has like on-call cycles right now with one person, and I think that's insane. That's part of their issues that they're having, but it's not gonna be sustainable. That person is going to leave in weeks. If I was on call by myself for a big service, I would leave. So having enough people on the rotation, I love follow the sun rotations where you have multiple different places, or just an agreement within the team that I'll be on call for 12 hours and take a break and kind of live my life, and then you're on call. So you're not having to worry about your laptop going off while you're in the bathroom. Just those little things can kind of build up. So you can celebrate your kid's birthday and all of this other stuff. Otherwise, I think in general, everyone is going to grow in their role. If you want to be a more senior IC as you continue going up, you're going to maybe still not be on call on the rotation anymore. So some of it is just going to be growth, that some people are going to move into other things, and that's fine. Some things aren't a good fit. SRE wasn't a great fit for me. I love it, but I didn't stay in. That's not against SRE. It's just we all need to move on. But yeah. Am I at time?
One more.
One more. Hey, yes.
Twitter about that, but their communication team's gone, so you won't get an answer.
That's true.
The thing I wanted to ask about, though, has to do with ownership.
Yes.
Ownership is a big pain point for us, and I'm wondering, in your experience, what have you come across that has helped you improve knowing who owns what? And I'm asking this question from the perspective of CMDB or anything else, any other related topic.
Yeah. As I described, we struggled on when the SRE team was on about who owned what as well. It can be tricky. One of the ways that we did learn was literally switching off servers and seeing who pinged us. Just being like, hey, my server's off. I'm like, it's you. And updated our systems manually. It's hard to have a living document, but that's the only thing that I can really think of, right? A database of putting like this group owns this, and making sure that none of these are pointing to an individual, right? Like team aliases. And still, I know teams change, but hopefully then it makes it a little bit easier to kind of track down if that team changed and that thing passed on to that. But I don't really have a good answer other than switching things off and seeing what happens. Yeah, I've heard some really good talks about that, but happy to chat later to see if there's any way I can kind of narrow down your question a bit more. Cool. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Ajuna. Great job.